There is something strange about a philosophy born in Athens over 2,000 years ago, finding its way into the minds of modern executives, athletes, soldiers, and therapists. Stoicism was not designed to be fashionable. It was not built for Instagram quotes or motivational posters. It was built for the hard moments, for loss, for uncertainty, for the quiet terror of not knowing whether you are enough. And yet, here we are. The Stoics believed that life would be difficult, not as a warning, but as a starting point. Marcus Aurelius, who ruled the Roman Empire at its height, began many mornings by reminding himself that the day ahead would bring frustrating people, setbacks, and things outside his control. He did not do this to be gloomy. He did this so that nothing could ambush him. Epictetus, who was born a slave and became one of the most influential philosophers in history, taught that the path to freedom had nothing to do with your circumstances. He had no freedom of movement, no property, no political power, and yet he described himself, and was described by others, as among the freest men alive. His freedom lived entirely inside him, in the choices he made about how to interpret what happened to him.
Seneca, the wealthy statesman who advised emperors and still found time to write letters that feel like they were written last Tuesday, worried constantly that people were wasting their lives, not by being idle, but by spending their energy on things that could never satisfy them. Reputation, other people's approval, the next achievement, the next possession. He noticed, with something between sadness and urgency, that most people would rather endure almost any suffering than sit alone with their own minds. What all three of these men shared, and what drew millions of followers across centuries, was not a set of abstract doctrines. It was a set of habits, practical, daily disciplines that reshaped how a person met the world. Disciplines that, when practiced consistently, did something remarkable. They made a person difficult to rattle. They built the kind of inner architecture that could hold weight. That is what this audiobook is about.
We are not going to explore Stoicism as an academic exercise. We are going to look at 9 specific habits drawn from Stoic teaching and practice. Habits that, when woven into daily life, produce something that most people are quietly searching for: genuine confidence and emotional security. Not the performed kind, not the brittle kind that needs constant reassurance. The kind that comes from knowing yourself, trusting your own judgment, and no longer requiring the world to behave in order for you to be okay. These 9 habits are not a checklist to rush through. Each one is a complete practice with its own texture and depth. Some will feel immediately familiar. Others will challenge something you have believed about yourself for a long time. All of them, taken seriously, have the capacity to change how you move through the world. We will begin at the beginning, with the single most important distinction in Stoic thought, the one that everything else hangs on. And from there, we will move through habits of thought, habits of attention, habits of relationship, and habits of self-knowledge, until we have assembled something that looks less like a philosophy course and more like a set of tools you can actually use. Take your time with this. Some sections you may want to hear twice. Some ideas may need a few days to settle before they start to feel true rather than just interesting. That is fine. The Stoics themselves were not in a hurry. They understood that building a self-worth inhabiting is slow work, and that it is the only work that truly matters. Let us begin. 1. Drawing the line. Knowing what is and is not yours to control. Epictetus opens his handbook, the Enchiridion, with a sentence that is either the most obvious thing ever written or the most radical, depending on where you are in life. He writes, "Some things are in our power and others are not." That is it. That is the whole game. In our power, our judgments, our intentions, our desires, our responses, our values, our effort. Not in our power, our bodies, our reputations, other people's opinions, outcomes, the weather, the economy, the behavior of strangers, the passage of time, and nearly everything else we spend our days trying to manage. Read that list slowly. Notice how much of what you worry about on a given day falls into the second column. The reason this distinction matters so deeply for confidence and emotional security is that confidence built on things outside your control is not really confidence at all. It is a bet. When your sense of yourself depends on whether other people approve of you, you are placing your psychological stability into someone else's hands. When your emotional equilibrium depends on outcomes you cannot guarantee, you are building your house on sand, and you know it. Somewhere underneath the surface activity of daily life, there is a low hum of anxiety, because on some level, you are aware that the things propping up your sense of worth could be taken away.
The Stoics called the things outside our control externals, and they were careful to say that externals are not bad. Having good health, close relationships, financial stability, these are what they called preferred indifference. Preferable, certainly, but not the source of a good life. The source of a good life, the Stoics insisted, was always internal, always yours, always available, regardless of circumstances. This is not a call to passivity. The Stoics were not people who shrugged and accepted everything. Marcus Aurelius spent decades fighting wars, managing crises, and making consequential decisions. Cato walked across the Libyan desert rather than submit to Caesar's rule. Seneca worked tirelessly on his writing and his governance. The point is not to stop trying. The point is to locate your effort in the right place. There is a practice here, and it is worth taking seriously. When you notice yourself becoming anxious, frustrated, or destabilized, pause and ask, what part of this is actually mine? What part of this can I genuinely influence through my choices and my character? And what part of this am I treating as mine when it never was? You will find, if you do this honestly, that the anxiety almost always lives in the second category. You are disturbed not by the thing itself, but by your claim on an outcome you never controlled to begin with.
The philosopher William Irvine, who has written extensively about Stoic practice in modern life, describes this as the dichotomy of control, and he notes that internalizing it is not something that happens once in a flash of insight. It is a practice that has to be renewed again and again in the small irritations and the large crises of ordinary life. The person who cuts you off in traffic, the project that does not go the way you planned, the relationship that will not do what you want it to do. Each of these moments is an invitation to ask, where is the line? What is genuinely mine? And where am I borrowing trouble from a future I cannot command? Emotional security does not come from guaranteeing your circumstances. It comes from knowing, deep in your bones, that your sense of yourself is not dependent on those circumstances. That is not a small thing. For most people, it is a complete reorganization of how they understand themselves and the world. The habit is this. Every day, especially in the moments of friction and frustration, practice drawing the line. Notice the difference between what you can actually influence and what you are trying to control. Over time, you will find that the zone of your genuine agency becomes clearer and more powerful, precisely because you have stopped diluting it with energy spent on things that were never yours to begin with.
2. The inner witness, building self-awareness through daily conversation with his own mind, examining his thoughts, calling himself out when he fell short of his own standards, and reminding himself, day after day, of the things he most needed to remember. What strikes modern readers about the Meditations is not the profundity of the philosophy, though it is profound. What strikes them is the honesty. Marcus catches himself wanting praise. He notices when he is being impatient or self-important. He records moments of frustration and then talks himself through them. He is, in the most fundamental sense, watching himself, not with judgment or self-punishment, but with clear, sustained attention. This is the second Stoic habit, developing what we might call the inner witness, the practice of stepping back, even slightly, from the immediate experience of your own thoughts and feelings and observing them as if from a small distance. Why does this matter for confidence and emotional security?
Because most of our suffering is not caused by events. It is caused by our unexamined reactions to events. Epictetus was insistent on this. It is not things that disturb us, but our judgments about things. The event itself is neutral. The story we tell about it, that is where the trouble begins.
When someone criticizes you, the fact of criticism is neutral. It is your interpretation of it as a threat, as evidence that you are not enough, as something to be defended against, that produces the emotional disturbance. And you cannot challenge an interpretation you have not noticed. You cannot change a story you are still telling yourself as if it were simply reality. The inner witness is what makes the gap visible. It is what allows you to notice in the moment that you have moved from experiencing something to reacting to it, and that in the space between experience and reaction, there is a choice. Viktor Frankl, who developed his own form of this insight in a Nazi concentration camp, called this gap the last of human freedoms, the freedom to choose how you respond to what happens to you. The Stoic practice of daily reflection is the training ground for this inner witness. Seneca recommended reviewing the day each evening, not to punish yourself for mistakes, but to learn from them. He asked himself 3 questions. Where did I act in accordance with my values? Where did I fall short? What can I do differently tomorrow? This was not self-flagellation, it was calibration. There is a quality that this practice develops over time that is hard to describe precisely but immediately recognizable, a kind of groundedness. People who have cultivated the inner witness tend to be hard to rattle, not because nothing affects them, but because they have developed a stable relationship with their own inner experience. They are not surprised by their own emotions. They do not panic when difficult feelings arise. They have sat with enough of their own inner weather to know that it passes, that it is informative but not commanding, and that they are not identical to any particular mood or reaction. This is a form of confidence that most people never develop. Not confidence in the external sense, the projected self-assurance of someone performing certainty, but the quiet internal kind, the confidence of a person who knows themselves well enough to trust themselves. The practice is simple, though not easy. At the end of each day, even 5 minutes is enough. Sit with the day that has just passed, not to rehearse it anxiously, but to observe it. Where were you reactive? Where were you present and clear? What stories did you tell yourself about events that might not have needed those stories? What values showed up in your actions, and what values were conspicuously absent? Over weeks and months, this practice does something cumulative. You begin to know your patterns.
You begin to anticipate the situations that trigger you, not so that you can avoid them, but so that you can meet them differently. You develop what the Stoics would call practical wisdom, the ability to respond to life with discernment, from a place of self-knowledge rather than automatic reaction. 3. Negative visualization, befriending what you fear. This one tends to surprise people the first time they encounter it. Stoicism recommends, as a regular practice, imagining the loss of the things you value most, not dwelling in anxiety about them, not spiraling into catastrophic thinking, but sitting deliberately and calmly with the thought, what if this were gone? What if this relationship ended? What if I lost this job, this home, this health? What if the people I love were no longer here? The Stoics called this premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. Seneca wrote about it at length. Marcus returned to it repeatedly. It sounds, on first hearing, like a recipe for misery. In practice, it produces almost the opposite. The first thing negative visualization does is strip away the unconscious assumption that good things are permanent.
We are extraordinary creatures when it comes to adaptation. We adjust quickly to good fortune and take it for granted almost immediately. The vacation you planned for months becomes, within days, simply where you are. The relationship that once felt miraculous becomes the background of your life. The health you take for granted becomes visible only when it is threatened. This adaptation is useful in some ways,
but it comes at a cost. It robs us of gratitude and keeps our appetite for more perpetually unsatisfied. When you spend a few minutes each week genuinely imagining that you no longer have the things you currently have, something unexpected happens. You return to your life the way you might return to a city you have always lived in after a long time away, suddenly seeing it as if for the first time, noticing what you had stopped noticing, feeling a warmth and appreciation for ordinary things that had somehow become invisible. But that is only the first benefit. The deeper one has to do with fear. Most of us carry a diffuse, unexamined fear about loss. It operates below the surface of conscious thought, shaping our decisions and our emotional responses without our awareness. We avoid situations that might lead to rejection because we have never fully confronted what rejection would actually mean. We stay in unsatisfying arrangements because the imagined terror of leaving feels more real than the actual cost of staying. We make choices designed to prevent the future rather than build it.
Negative visualization, practiced regularly and calmly, does something remarkable to this kind of fear. It makes the feared thing visible and therefore negotiable. When you have sat with the thought of losing something, really sat with it, not just glanced at it and flinched away, you discover that you can bear the thought. And if you can bear the thought of a loss, you have, in some fundamental way, already begun to make peace with the possibility of it. This does not mean you become indifferent. The Stoics were not cold people. They loved their children, grieved their friends, cared about outcomes. What they cultivated was what they called preferred indifference, a genuine preference for good outcomes, combined with the inner stability not to be destroyed if those outcomes did not materialize. Epictetus had a particularly direct way of teaching this. He suggested that whenever you are about to enjoy something, a meal, a conversation, a moment with someone you love, you whisper to yourself, "This is borrowed." Everything we have is, in the Stoic view, on loan from fortune. Knowing this does not diminish the enjoyment, it deepens it. It brings you fully into the moment, rather than allowing you to half-inhabit it while your mind races ahead to the next thing. There is also a practical dimension to this habit that extends into confidence. People who have genuinely confronted the possibility of their worst fears tend to be less governed by those fears in daily life. The executive who has truly considered what failure would mean is less likely to make timid, self-protective decisions. The person who has sat with the thought of rejection is less likely to avoid meaningful relationships. Fear shrinks when you walk toward it, not when you run from it or pretend it does not exist. The practice is this. Once a week, spend a few minutes in quiet reflection, imagining that something you value has been taken from you. Not obsessively, not to make yourself miserable, but carefully and honestly. Then return to your life with fresh eyes. Let what was invisible become visible again. Let the things you love become the remarkable things they actually are. 4. Virtue as the compass, deciding what kind of person you are. Every Stoic philosopher, from Zeno of Citium, who founded the school around 300 BCE, to Marcus Aurelius, who practiced it at the apex of Roman power, agreed on one thing above all else. The good life is built on virtue. And virtue, for the Stoics, was not a performance. It was not a set of rules to follow when people were watching. It was the deepest form of self-definition, the answer to the question, who am I actually?
The 4 cardinal virtues in Stoic thought were wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. Wisdom is the ability to distinguish what is genuinely good from what merely appears to be good. Courage is the willingness to act in accordance with your values, even when it costs you. Justice is the commitment to treating others with fairness and care, recognizing our fundamental connection to one another. Temperance is the discipline of not being ruled by your appetites, impulses, or the desire for approval. These are not passive qualities. They are active orientations, ways of meeting each situation that require ongoing choice and practice. And the reason they matter so profoundly for confidence and emotional security is this. When your sense of self is grounded in who you are,
Rather than in what you have achieved or how others see you, you have a foundation that cannot be taken from you. Consider the alternative. Most people's self-image is built substantially on external scaffolding: their job title, their social status, the approval of the people they respect, their track record of successes. None of these things is inherently bad, but all of them are contingent. They can change. They can be lost. And when they are, the person whose identity was built on them finds themselves without a floor to stand on. The Stoic alternative is to build your identity on something that cannot be taken: your choices. Specifically, your commitment to act virtuously, with wisdom, courage, fairness, and self-discipline, regardless of circumstances.
Marcus Aurelius came back to this again and again in the Meditations, in different formulations, but always the same essential point. When you are deciding how to act, ask not what will produce the best outcome, but what a good person would do here. The outcome is not yours to guarantee. The quality of your response is. This reorientation has a specific effect on confidence. Genuine self-respect, the kind that does not require maintenance, that does not collapse when someone challenges you, comes from the knowledge that you are trying to be the kind of person you actually want to be. Not performing goodness for an audience, not meeting some external standard imposed from outside, but genuinely, privately, in the moments no one is watching, making choices that align with your values. There is a question here that is worth sitting with for a while. What are your actual values? Not the values you would list if someone asked, but the ones that show up in how you spend your time and attention. What do your choices say about what you believe matters? And where do those revealed values diverge from the person you want to be? The gap between those two things, the values you hold and the values you live, is a significant source of the quiet unease that undermines emotional security. You can carry a lot of external success and still feel fundamentally uncertain about yourself when you know, privately, that how you are living does not match what you actually believe.
The Stoic prescription is not to feel guilty about this gap. It is to close it, one choice at a time. Each small act of courage in the face of discomfort. Each moment of choosing fairness when unfairness would be easier. Each time you apply self-discipline to an impulse that would pull you away from who you want to be. These are not grand gestures. They are accumulations, and they compound over time into something you can actually stand on. The habit, then, is deliberate character building, taking seriously the question of what kind of person you are in the process of becoming, and making choices each day that move you toward that person, rather than away from them. This is not perfectionism. The Stoics understood that failure is part of the practice. It is the direction of your effort that matters, not the cleanliness of your record. 5. The obstacle is the way. Reframing adversity as training. One of the most quoted lines from Marcus Aurelius reads, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." In the years since Ryan Holiday brought this idea to wider modern attention, it has become something of a motivational slogan. But beneath the slogan, there is a genuine philosophical practice, one with real implications for how you encounter difficulty, and for the kind of confidence that grows not in spite of challenge, but because of it.
The Stoics observed something about the structure of a well-lived life that cuts against a lot of modern assumptions. Adversity is not the interruption of growth. It is, when met correctly, the primary vehicle for it. The person who has never faced genuine setback has also never had occasion to discover what they are made of. The person who has been shielded from difficulty has been deprived, in a meaningful sense, of the raw material from which character is built. This is not the same as saying that suffering is good or that we should seek it out. The Stoics preferred indifference, health over illness, success over failure, ease over difficulty. But they recognized with clear eyes that difficulty is inevitable, and that the question of how to meet it is among the most important questions a person can face. The reframe they proposed is this:
Every obstacle contains within it an opportunity to practice the very qualities you are trying to develop. The difficult colleague is an opportunity to practice patience. The failed project is an opportunity to practice resilience and self-examination. The rejection is an opportunity to practice self-worth, independent of outcomes. The loss is an opportunity to practice the acceptance that the Stoics taught was not resignation, but a form of wisdom.
Marcus wrote about this repeatedly, partly because he was emperor during a time of genuine catastrophe, plague, invasion, betrayal by people he trusted, and he needed a framework for meeting those events that would allow him to continue functioning. What he developed through years of practice was the ability to look at each difficulty and ask, what does this require of me? Not as a lament, but as a genuine inquiry. What is the virtue that this situation is calling forth? The psychological impact of this reframe is significant. When you stop experiencing obstacles as evidence that life is going wrong and start experiencing them as the material from which your character is forged, your relationship to difficulty changes fundamentally. You stop dreading it in the same way. You stop trying to arrange your life so that nothing hard can get in. You develop what the psychologists now call adversarial growth. The phenomenon, well documented in research, where people who have faced and worked through genuine difficulty often report becoming more open, more compassionate, more confident, and more clear about what actually matters to them. The Stoics were not surprised by this research. They had observed the pattern for centuries. Seneca wrote that fire tests gold and adversity tests strong men. What he meant was not that you need adversity to prove yourself to others, but that the encounter with genuine difficulty, met with the right orientation, is what reveals and develops genuine strength of character.
There is a practice here that is worth building deliberately. When you encounter an obstacle, a setback, a frustration, a failure, a loss, pause before reacting and ask, what is this developing in me? What would a person of wisdom and character do with this? Not as a way of minimizing the difficulty, but as a way of locating yourself as a participant in it, rather than a victim of it. The distinction between participant and victim is important. The victim is acted upon. The participant acts. Both are in the same circumstance. The difference is in the quality of engagement, and in the long run, in who they become. 6. Memento mori, letting mortality clarify your priorities. The Stoics kept death close, not morbidly, not as a source of dread, but as what they called the ultimate clarifier, the one fact that, when genuinely held in mind, cuts through the noise and reveals what actually matters. Memento mori, remember that you will die, was not a dark incantation. It was a practical tool.
The emotional security that comes from genuinely confronting your own mortality is hard to explain to someone who has not experienced it, because it sounds like it should produce the opposite. But the Stoics noticed, and modern psychologists have confirmed in extensive research on what is called terror management theory, that how you handle the awareness of death determines an enormous amount about how you live. People who avoid the thought of death, which is most people most of the time, tend to manage the resulting anxiety in ways that are not particularly healthy or effective. They chase status and recognition as a form of symbolic immortality. They stay in relationships or situations they have outgrown because change feels threatening. They invest enormous energy in performing a self that will be approved of, in the hope that if enough people validate them, the fundamental anxiety underneath will quiet down. It never does. People who have genuinely sat with their mortality, not in despair but in clear-eyed acknowledgement, tend to report something different. A clarification of priorities, a reduced tolerance for wasted time, an increased willingness to take meaningful risks, a loosening of the grip of other people's opinions. Because when you genuinely understand that your time is finite, spending it trying to manage what others think of you starts to look like a very poor use of a very limited resource. There is also something it does specifically for confidence. One of the deepest sources of insecurity is the fear of judgment, the sense that if the wrong people see you in the wrong light, something important will be lost.
When you hold in mind that everyone who currently judges you will also be gone, and that the vast majority of your judgments will be entirely forgotten within a generation or two, it is hard to sustain the same level of anxiety about them. Not because nothing matters, but because the things that actually matter come into sharper focus. Seneca was particularly urgent about this. He opens his essay On the Shortness of Life with the observation that it is not that life is short, it is that we waste so much of it. He catalogs the ways people give their time away, chasing advancement, entertaining social obligations that bring them nothing, postponing the life they actually want to live until conditions are right. The conditions are never right. Seneca is almost impatient about this. We act as if we have 1,000 years. We do not.
The practice here has two dimensions. The first is simple. Spend a few minutes each week in honest contemplation of your own mortality. Not to be morbid, but to ask, from that vantage point, whether you are spending your time and attention on things that genuinely matter to you. Are you doing the work you actually care about? Are you giving your real attention to the relationships you value? Are you living in a way that your dying self would recognize as meaningful? The second dimension is what the Stoics called living as if this were your last day. Not as license for recklessness, but as a way of bringing full presence to what is actually in front of you. The conversation you are having right now, the work that is on your desk, the person sitting across from you. Not because nothing else will come after, but because this is what is here, and here is where your life is actually happening.
7. Radical honesty with yourself. The Stoic practice of self-examination. There is a particular kind of suffering that comes not from what happens to us, but from our unwillingness to see ourselves clearly. The Stoics were under no illusions about this. They were some of the most rigorous practitioners of self-examination in the ancient world, and they were rigorous because they understood that self-deception is not a harmless quirk. It is a source of ongoing unhappiness and a barrier to genuine confidence. Seneca wrote about this with characteristic directness. He described the way people excuse their own faults, minimize their own failings, and construct elaborate justifications for behaviors they would immediately condemn in others. He was not writing about his contemporaries only. He was writing about himself. The Meditations of Marcus Aurelius are full of moments where he catches himself in exactly this kind of self-serving reasoning and refuses to accept it. The connection to confidence is not obvious at first. We tend to think that confidence comes from thinking well of ourselves, from maintaining a positive self-image, believing in our capabilities, and generally keeping the inner critic quiet. There is something to this, but the Stoics would point out that confidence built on a flattering but inaccurate self-image is extremely fragile, because whenever reality contradicts that image, the entire structure shakes.
Genuine confidence, the kind that is actually stable, comes from a relationship with yourself in which you can see clearly, hold what you see without panic, and trust your ability to work with the truth of who you are. This requires the willingness to look honestly at your actual patterns of behavior, your genuine motivations, the places where you fall short of your own values, and the ways in which your self-perception may be more favorable than the evidence warrants. The Stoics practice this through their evening reviews, which we touched on earlier, but it goes deeper than a daily check-in. It is a whole orientation towards self-knowledge that includes the willingness to hear difficult feedback, to sit with uncomfortable truths, and to resist the pull towards self-justification when you have made a mistake. There is a quality that this practice develops which is almost paradoxically confidence-building, the ability to be wrong without it threatening your sense of self. Most people experience being wrong as a kind of attack. If I was wrong about this, what else might I be wrong about? If I made this mistake, maybe I am not the capable, trustworthy person I thought I was. This response to being wrong produces defensive behavior, denial, blame-shifting, minimizing, that compounds the original error and prevents learning.
The person who has practiced honest self-examination has a different relationship to error. Being wrong is information. A mistake is data. It is uncomfortable, certainly, but it is not threatening. Because the self-worth of such a person is not built on being infallible.
It is built on the commitment to see clearly and act accordingly. And that commitment is only strengthened, not weakened, by the willingness to acknowledge and learn from error. Marcus Aurelius wrote, in a line that could serve as a mantra for this entire habit, "If someone can prove me wrong, I will gladly change. What is the point of clinging to what is not true?" What would it mean to adopt that orientation genuinely? Not just as a philosophical position, but as an actual practice in daily life. To become the kind of person who genuinely welcomes correction, who holds their views with enough lightness to release them when the evidence calls for it, who can examine their own motivations with the same clear eyes they apply to everyone else.
This is the radical honesty the Stoics practiced, not the performed honesty of someone who confesses their flaws as a way of seeming humble, but the genuine working honesty of a person who is actually trying to see themselves as they are. The practice begins with discomfort. The first honest look at a pattern you would rather not acknowledge is rarely pleasant. But the Stoics would remind you that discomfort is not the same as harm. The discomfort of seeing yourself clearly is the price of the freedom that comes from no longer needing to maintain a fiction. 8. The discipline of desire, wanting the right things in the right way. One of the more subtle contributions of Stoic philosophy, and one of the most practically powerful, is its analysis of desire. Not the content of what we want, but the structure of wanting itself.
The Stoics noticed something about desire that modern psychology has since confirmed in considerable detail. The relentless pursuit of things you do not yet have is one of the most reliable routes to dissatisfaction, regardless of whether you get those things. This is not because the things themselves are bad. It is because the habit of desiring, of orienting yourself fundamentally toward what you lack, is self-perpetuating. You get the thing. The satisfaction lasts briefly. The desiring mind immediately identifies the next thing, and the chase continues, with the goalposts always receding. Seneca saw this with painful clarity in the society around him and in himself. He was enormously wealthy by the standards of his time, and he wrote about wealth with a kind of rueful wisdom that only comes from having had it and noticed that it did not do what he had hoped. It is not that wealth is bad, he argued. It is that wealth sought as the solution to the underlying problem, the desire for security, worth, meaning, never actually solves it. The problem lives in the structure of the seeking, not in any particular object of that seeking. The Stoic alternative is not asceticism, not the denial of all desire. It is what Epictetus called the discipline of desire, learning to want well, to want things that can actually satisfy, to hold preferences without being enslaved to them, to pursue things with genuine effort and genuine equanimity about the outcome.
For confidence and emotional security, this matters enormously, because a substantial portion of what we experience as insecurity is actually the emotional turbulence of chronic desire, the anxiety of wanting something we might not get, the disappointment of getting it and finding it insufficient, the restlessness that follows when our appetite for more immediately reasserts itself. The person who has cultivated the discipline of desire is recognizable. They are genuinely content in a way that looks unusual in a culture that treats restlessness as a virtue. They can enjoy good things without being dominated by the need for more of them. They pursue their goals without the frenetic quality of someone who believes their worth is contingent on achieving them. They can be pleased without being dependent on being pleased. And when things do not go as hoped, they can meet that disappointment with equanimity, not suppression, but genuine acceptance, because they never bet their entire inner life on the outcome. Epictetus described this practice in terms of what he called appropriate action, pursuing things with full effort, but holding the desire for the outcome loosely. He used the metaphor of an archer. You train extensively, you take careful aim, you release with skill and attention, and then the arrow leaves your hand.
The wind is not yours to command. The result is not yours to guarantee. What you can own is the quality of your preparation and the sincerity of your effort. There is also something important here about desire for approval, one of the most widespread and least examined forms of desire in modern life. The need for other people to think well of you is so pervasive that most people barely notice it operating. But it shapes decisions in profound ways. What we say and do not say, what risks we take and avoid, what we wear and how we present ourselves, what opinions we share publicly. The Stoics did not say that caring what others think is wrong, but they observed that when the desire for approval becomes a dependency, when your sense of yourself requires ongoing validation to stay intact, you have handed enormous power to other people. And those people are outside your control. They will approve of you or not based on their own moods, their own values, their own needs. Their opinion of you is not a reliable measure of your worth. Treating it as one is a recipe for chronic instability. The discipline of desire, applied to approval, looks like this. Pursue things worth pursuing with genuine effort. Treat others with genuine care and honesty, and release the need for a particular response. Do the work. Say the true thing. Be the person you want to be. And let the reception be what it is, without making it the referendum on who you are.
9. Cosmopolitan belonging. Finding security in connection to something larger in the world. Disconnected from others, from meaning, from anything larger than the small drama of your own daily concerns. The Stoics were alert to this, and their answer to it was one of the most radical ideas in ancient philosophy. Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoicism, reportedly said that he was a citizen of the world. Not in the metaphorical way we sometimes use that phrase today, not merely meaning he was well-traveled or open-minded. He meant something more specific, that the boundaries between self and other, between your tribe and everyone else's, between your concerns and the concerns of the universe, were less real and less important than most people believed. The Stoics developed this idea into what they called oikeiosis, a sense of kinship or familial connection that extended outward from the self, through family and friends, to community, to all of humanity, and ultimately to the cosmos itself. Marcus Aurelius described this as being a limb of the body of rational beings. Not a metaphor, a description of what he understood to be literally true, that we are not isolated individuals navigating a hostile universe, but parts of an interconnected whole.
This has direct implications for confidence and emotional security in ways that might not be immediately obvious. The first is that a great deal of personal insecurity is actually the insecurity of isolation, the sense that if you fail, if you are rejected, if you do not achieve what you are reaching for, you will be alone with that failure in a world that does not care. The Stoic sense of belonging to something larger, to the human community, to the ongoing project of civilization, to the intelligible order of things, provides a kind of ballast against this feeling. You are not alone. You never were. Your difficulties are shared difficulties. Your struggles are part of a larger, longer story. The second implication is that meaning, which is one of the most reliable foundations of psychological security, comes primarily from contribution to something beyond yourself. The Stoics were deeply civic. Marcus wrote about his obligations to the empire not as burdens, but as the very substance of a meaningful life. Seneca wrote that a life spent serving only oneself is a cramped and poverty-stricken thing. The life that opens outward, that is genuinely invested in the well-being of others, that takes seriously its responsibilities to its community and time, is a life that has a floor beneath it that narrow self-concern simply cannot provide. There is also something important here about how we handle criticism, rejection, and the disapproval of others. When your sense of belonging is contingent on the approval of any particular group or person, their withdrawal of that approval feels like exile. But when your sense of belonging is rooted in a broader connection, to humanity, to your values, to the ongoing work of trying to live well in the world, no single person or group holds the power to excommunicate you from what matters. Marcus Aurelius wrote about this in a way that has stayed with readers for nearly 2,000 years. When someone hurts you, he said, consider that you and this person are part of the same body. You would not harm your own eye in response to the eye causing you pain. You would try to heal it.
This is not naive sentimentality. Marcus spent considerable time dealing with people who genuinely tried to harm him, and he still held this view because he understood that his own stability depended on not treating temporary adversaries as fundamental enemies.
The practice of this habit has several dimensions. The most immediate is simply expanding your circle of genuine care, investing real attention and concern in the people around you, not as a strategy for being liked, but as an expression of the fundamental connection the Stoics believed was real. Service to others in this framework is not self-sacrifice, it is self-actualization. It is the expression of the largest, most connected version of yourself. The deeper practice is philosophical, building a sense of belonging that does not depend on any particular community's approval, because it is rooted in something that cannot be revoked: your membership in the human project, your participation in the long, imperfect, magnificent attempt to live well and build something worth leaving behind. Conclusion: building the unshakable self. We have covered a great deal of ground together. 9 habits drawn from one of the most durable and practically serious philosophical traditions in human history. It is worth pausing here at the end to look at them as a whole, because individually they are practices, but together they are something more. They are an architecture, a way of building a self that can hold weight. The first habit, drawing the line between what is and is not yours to control, is the foundation. Without it, every other practice floats. With it, you have a clear principle for where to invest your energy and where to release your grip. The second habit, the inner witness, is the tool that makes everything else possible. Without self-awareness, you cannot apply any practice with intelligence. You are just reacting. With self-awareness, you have the gap between stimulus and response that Viktor Frankl identified as the seat of human freedom. The third habit, negative visualization, builds gratitude and strips away the unconscious fear of loss that governs so many of our decisions. It also, paradoxically, frees you to love things more fully, because you are no longer unconsciously holding them at a distance to protect yourself from their potential loss. The fourth habit, virtue as compass, gives you an identity that cannot be taken from you. When you know what kind of person you are committed to being, and when your daily choices reflect that commitment, you have a self-respect that does not require maintenance from outside.
The fifth habit, finding the way through the obstacle, transforms your relationship to difficulty from one of avoidance and resistance to one of engaged participation. Every setback becomes material. Every challenge becomes a training ground. The sixth habit, holding mortality close, strips away the noise and reminds you of what actually matters. It is the great clarifier, the thing that makes it possible to say no to the trivial and yes to the meaningful. The seventh habit, radical honesty with yourself, builds the kind of stable, secure relationship with yourself that makes outside validation unnecessary. When you know yourself clearly and accept what you see, you are no longer dependent on others to tell you who you are. The eighth habit, the discipline of desire, frees you from the treadmill of chronic wanting and the turbulence of approval seeking. It is the practice of wanting well, of holding preferences without being enslaved to them. And the ninth habit, belonging to something larger, provides a foundation of meaning that no individual success or failure can undermine. It is the recognition that you are not alone, that your life matters in relation to others, and that contribution to something beyond yourself is both the most reliable source of meaning and one of the deepest foundations of genuine security.
None of these habits is mastered quickly. The Stoics themselves, Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca, were not claiming to have arrived. They were claiming to be on the path. The Meditations are not a record of someone who had figured everything out. They are the record of someone who kept trying, kept examining, kept returning to his values even when he fell short of them. That is what the practice looks like. Not a transformation that happens once,
not an achievement that can be finished and set aside. A daily, quiet, persistent commitment to meeting yourself and the world with as much wisdom and courage and honesty as you can muster on that particular day. The Stoics believed that this kind of life, this kind of ongoing, serious engagement with the question of how to live well, was not just personally satisfying. It was what humans were for. That we are, at our best, rational and social creatures, capable of extraordinary self-knowledge and genuine contribution to the world around us. That the examined life, the life lived with intention and awareness and care, is not just more pleasant than its alternative, it is more fully human.
The confidence and emotional security you build through these practices will not look like the confidence of someone who has nothing to fear. It will look like the confidence of someone who has faced what there is to fear and found that they can bear it. It will look like the security of someone who no longer needs the world to behave in a particular way in order to be okay. It is, in the end, the confidence of a person who knows themselves, who has done the work of becoming someone they can trust, who has built, through daily practice and honest attention, a self that is genuinely inhabitable. The Stoics called this eudaimonia, often translated as happiness, but more accurately rendered as flourishing, the state of a human being living fully in accordance with their nature and their values. It is available to you. It always was. The tools are in your hands. The work is yours to do.